Life wasn't supposed to turn out this way for Jasmine. She was just a young woman, full of dreams and hopes, trying her best to raise her little boy in a world that often felt too heavy for her shoulders. At 28 years old, she already carried more weight than most people would ever know. Every morning, as the sun peeked through the cracks in the blinds, she'd wake up with one thought on her mind: how could she make today better than yesterday? But lately, it seemed like no matter how hard she tried, things only got worse. Jasmine lived in a small southern town where everyone knew everyone else's business. It wasn't the kind of place where you could hide when life fell apart. 2 years ago, her husband, a good man who worked hard and loved his family deeply, was taken from her in a car accident. That day changed everything. Not only did she lose her partner, but she also lost the sense of security that came with having him by her side. Their son, Elijah, was only 3 at the time. He didn't fully understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore, but he missed him all the same. After the funeral, Jasmine found herself standing alone, holding Elijah's hand tightly, while tears streamed down both their faces. The grief was overwhelming, a wave that threatened to pull her under every single day. That's when Marcus's family stepped in, or so she thought. They offered her a place to stay, saying they wanted to help her get back on her feet. "You don't have to do this alone," they told her. For a moment, Jasmine believed them. Maybe they really did care about her and Elijah. Maybe they saw how much she was struggling and wanted to be there for her. So she packed what little they had left and moved into their house. But soon enough, the cracks began to show. At first it was subtle, a sharp comment here, an icy glare there. Then came the accusations. "If you'd been paying attention, maybe he wouldn't have died," one of them spat during dinner one night. The words hit Jasmine like a punch to the gut. How dare they blame her for something she couldn't control? But she bit her tongue, telling herself it was just grief talking. People said hurtful things when they were hurting, right? It didn't. Stop there. Over time, the insults grew louder, meaner. They criticized the way she cooked, the way she dressed, even the way she spoke to Elijah. Nothing she did was ever good enough. And then, one evening, it escalated beyond words. One of Marcus's brothers shoved her against the wall because she accidentally spilled water on the floor. When Elijah ran to her side screaming, another relative slapped him across the face, silencing his cries instantly. Jasmine froze, horrified, watching her baby crumble to the ground. That was the moment she realized she couldn't stay. Not if she wanted to protect Elijah. The breaking point came late one rainy night. After days of relentless torment, they cornered her in the kitchen. Someone grabbed her arm, twisting it until she cried out in pain. Elijah clung to her leg, sobbing, begging them to stop. But they didn't listen. Instead, they dragged her and Elijah outside, throwing their few belongings onto the wet pavement. "You're not welcome here anymore," they shouted before slamming the door shut behind them. Standing there in the cold rain, soaked to the bone, Jasmine felt like the world had collapsed around her. Her knees buckled and she sank to the ground, clutching Elijah close to her chest. What was she supposed to do now? Where could they go? For the first time in her life, she truly felt hopeless. But even in that dark moment, something inside her refused to give up completely. As Elijah trembled in her arms, whispering, "Mommy, I'm scared," she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened next, she would find a way to keep him safe. Somehow, some way, they would survive. And so, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and each other, Jasmine and Elijah set off into the unknown. Little did they know, their journey was far from over, and that somewhere out there, someone was about to change their lives forever. Jasmine and her son Elijah wandered the streets that night, their clothes still damp from the rain. The world felt colder than ever, not just because of the weather, but because of the emptiness inside them. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Every step was heavy, weighed down by fear, hunger, and exhaustion. Jasmine held Elijah's hand tightly, trying to shield him from the harsh reality they were facing. She whispered soft words of reassurance, even though she wasn't sure she believed them herself. "We'll be okay, baby. Mama's got you." The first few nights were the hardest. They slept in whatever shelter they could find. An abandoned building, a park bench, or under the awning of a closed store. Jasmine would wrap her arms around Elijah to keep him warm, praying he wouldn't wake up shivering. But Elijah wasn't sleeping well either. He tossed and turned, muttering in his sleep haunted by nightmares. Sometimes he'd wake up crying, calling out for the father he barely remembered. Those moments broke Jasmine's heart all over again. She'd hug him close, rocking him gently until he calmed down, even though tears often streamed down her own face too. During the day, Jasmine tried to figure out how to survive. She visited food banks and soup kitchens, standing in long lines with other people who looked just as desperate as she did. Some days she managed to get enough to feed Elijah, but there were times when the food ran out before it was her turn. On those days, she'd sit on the curb outside holding Elijah's hand, feeling like the world had forgotten them. She hated seeing the worry in his eyes when he asked, "Mommy, are we going to eat today?" It made her feel like she was failing him, even though she knew she was doing everything she possibly could. Finding work was another challenge. Without a permanent address, most places wouldn't hire her. And even if they did, who would take care of Elijah while she worked? She couldn't afford daycare, and leaving him alone wasn't an option. So she spent hours walking around town, knocking on doors, asking if anyone needed help cleaning houses, babysitting, or running errands. Most people turned her away, saying they didn't have any work for her. A few gave her odd jobs here and there, paying her just enough to buy a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. It wasn't much, but it kept them alive, for now. One afternoon, while sitting on the steps of a grocery store, Jasmine hit her breaking point. She had been begging passers-by for spare change, her voice hoarse from repeating the same plea over and over. "Please, anything you can give will help my son." People walked past without looking at her, some pretending not to hear, others shaking their heads and muttering about better options for her. Elijah sat beside her, clutching a small toy car someone had given him earlier that week. His stomach growled loudly, and he rested his head on her lap, too tired to cry anymore. Jasmine felt like she was drowning. Her body ached from lack of sleep. Her mind was foggy from hunger, and her spirit was worn thin from constant rejection. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for just a moment. But that moment stretched longer than she intended. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed to spin around her. Her vision blurred and her head throbbed painfully. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. Elijah screamed, shaking her arm frantically. "Mommy, wake up. Please wake up." His tiny voice echoed through the parking lot, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. A crowd began to gather, murmuring among themselves. Someone called an ambulance while another person knelt beside Elijah, trying to comfort him. "It's okay, sweetie. Help is coming," the stranger said softly. But Elijah didn't stop crying. He clung to his mother's hand, refusing to let go, terrified of losing the only person he had left. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed Jasmine's condition. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished, her body pushed to its limits. They loaded her onto a stretcher and rushed her to the hospital, with Elijah riding along in the ambulance. He sat quietly this time, staring at his mother's pale face, hoping she'd open her eyes and tell him everything would be all right. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her, while a nurse stayed with Elijah, offering him juice and crackers. He nibbled on the food slowly, his wide eyes darting around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Later that evening, after Jasmine regained consciousness, she learned about the man who had stopped to help them. Darius, a wealthy businessman passing through town, had seen the commotion outside the grocery store and immediately pulled over. Something about the scene, a young boy crying over his unconscious mother, had struck a chord deep within him. He hadn't hesitated to call for help and follow the ambulance to the hospital. Now, as Jasmine lay in the hospital bed, weak but awake, she couldn't help but wonder why a complete stranger would care so much about two people he didn't even know. The nurse who tended to her explained that Darius had paid for their medical bills and insisted on staying updated about their condition. "He seems very concerned about you and your son," the nurse said kindly. Jasmine nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness of a man she hadn't even met yet. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change. As the night wore on, Elijah curled up in a chair beside Jasmine's bed, clutching her hand tightly. He fell asleep eventually, his breathing slow and steady. Watching him, Jasmine whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for Darius, for the doctors and nurses, and for the strength that had somehow carried her this far. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she vowed to hold on to this newfound glimmer of hope no matter what. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to the soft hum of the hospital room. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden streaks across the floor. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm, not happiness, not relief, but calm. Her body was still weak, her mind heavy with everything that had happened, but there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the sterile scent of the hospital or the quiet beeping of machines monitoring her vitals. It was the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, help had finally arrived. Elijah stirred beside her, his small frame curled up awkwardly in the chair. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the sunlight. When he saw Jasmine awake, his face lit up with a tired smile. "Mommy," he whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. She squeezed it gently, brushing his messy hair back with her other hand. "Good morning, baby," she said softly. "How did you sleep?" Elijah shrugged, leaning closer to her. "I dreamed about Daddy," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine's heart clenched, but she forced a reassuring smile. "That's okay, sweetheart. Daddy loved us very much, and he's always watching over us." As they sat together, a knock came at the door. A nurse entered, followed by a tall man in a crisp suit. His presence commanded attention, not because he demanded it, but because he carried himself with quiet confidence. This was Darius, the man who had stopped to help them outside the grocery store. Jasmine recognized him immediately from the brief description the nurse had given her the night before. She straightened slightly in her bed, suddenly self-conscious. Her clothes were borrowed from the hospital, her hair uncombed, and her face pale from exhaustion. But Darius didn't seem to notice any of that. Instead, his gaze softened as he looked at her and Elijah. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and steady. "How are you feeling?" Jasmine hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. No one had asked her that question in such a long time, not genuinely, at least. "Better," she replied finally, her voice trembling a little. "Thank you for everything." Darius nodded, pulling up a chair to sit near her bed. "You don't have to thank me," he said firmly. "I'm just glad I was there when you needed help." For a while they talked, simple, polite conversation at first. Darius asked about Elijah, complimenting the boy on his bravery despite everything he'd been through. Elijah blushed, hiding behind Jasmine's arm shyly. Then Darius turned his attention back to Jasmine. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. At first, Jasmine hesitated. Talking about it meant reliving it, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that yet. But something about Darius's demeanor made her feel safe, like he truly wanted to understand rather than judge. So haltingly at first, she began to share her story. She told him about losing her husband, about moving in with his family, and about the abuse she and Elijah endured. Her voice wavered as she described the night they were thrown out into the rain, but she didn't stop. She owed it to herself and to Elijah to speak the truth. When she finished, tears glistened in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. Darius listened intently, his expression unreadable but compassionate. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Jasmine," he said, his tone serious but kind. "You deserve so much better than what you've been through, and your son deserves a chance to grow up in a world where he feels safe and loved." His words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the weight she'd been carrying for so long. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Like she mattered, like she was worth fighting for. She swallowed hard, nodding silently. Darius continued, explaining that he wanted to help them get back on their feet. He offered temporary housing in one of his properties, a small apartment fully furnished and rent-free until she was ready to stand on her own. He also promised to connect her with resources, job training programs, counseling for Elijah, and legal assistance if she decided to pursue charges against her in-laws. Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. It sounded too good to be true, like something out of a dream. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. Darius smiled, his eyes softening. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply. "And because I believe in the strength of people like you, people who keep going even when life knocks them down." His words brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were tears of gratitude, not despair. Over the next few days, Darius kept his promises. He arranged for their release from the hospital, ensuring they had everything they needed before leaving. He personally drove them to the apartment he'd prepared, helping carry Elijah's few belongings inside. The place was modest but clean and welcoming, with fresh sheets on the bed, groceries stocked in the kitchen, and toys scattered around for Elijah to play with. For the first time in months, Jasmine felt like she could breathe again. Elijah explored the apartment with wide-eyed wonder, running his fingers along the furniture and giggling as he discovered a box of crayons and coloring books left out for him. Jasmine watched him, her heart swelling with emotion. She turned to Darius, who stood near the doorway observing quietly. "I don't know how to repay you," she said honestly. "This is more than I ever imagined." Darius shook his head, smiling. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "Just focus on healing. That's repayment enough." As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine began to rebuild her life piece by piece. With Darius's support, she enrolled in a job training program designed to help single parents gain skills for stable employment. She also started seeing a therapist, encouraged by both Darius and the nurses at the hospital. At first, opening up about her pain was difficult, but slowly, she found comfort in sharing her burdens. Elijah, meanwhile, thrived in the stability of their new home. He played freely, laughed often, and even started making friends at a nearby community center. Darius checked in regularly, calling or visiting to see how they were doing. He never intruded or made demands. Instead, he listened, offered advice when asked, and celebrated their progress. His presence became a source of encouragement for Jasmine, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. One evening, as they sat together in the living room after dinner, Elijah coloring happily on the floor, Darius looked at Jasmine thoughtfully. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Don't forget that." Jasmine smiled, meeting his gaze. For the first time in years, she believed him. Jasmine's life began to take on a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but for the first time she could see glimpses of stability ahead. The apartment Darius had provided became more than just a roof over their heads. It was a sanctuary. A place where Elijah could laugh without fear, where Jasmine could sit by the window with a cup of coffee and breathe deeply, without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. Slowly, they were learning how to live again. Elijah adjusted quickly to the new environment. He loved the community center Darius had introduced them to, a bright, cheerful space filled with books, games, and other kids his age. At first, he was shy, clinging to Jasmine's side whenever they walked through the doors, but the staff there were patient and kind, coaxing him out of his shell little by little. They encouraged him to draw pictures, play games, and even join group activities. One day when Elijah proudly showed Jasmine a painting he'd made, a colorful swirl of blues and greens with stick figures holding hands, she felt tears prick her eyes. "That's beautiful, baby," she said, pulling him into a hug. "What is it?" Elijah grinned. "It's us, Mommy. You, me, and Daddy watching over us." Hearing those words melted something inside her. For so long, she'd been focused on survival, on making sure they had food to eat and a safe place to sleep. She hadn't realized how much Elijah still thought about his father, or how much he needed to talk about him. That night, as they sat together at the kitchen table eating macaroni and cheese, Jasmine decided to open up. "Do you miss Daddy a lot?" she asked gently. Elijah nodded, twirling his fork around absent-mindedly. "Yeah," he admitted. "But I know he's happy now. Right, Mommy?" Jasmine smiled, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, sweetheart, he's very proud of you." As Elijah grew more comfortable in their new home, Jasmine threw herself into the job training program. It wasn't easy balancing classes, homework, and caring for Elijah, but she was determined to make it work. The program focused on teaching, practical skills like budgeting, resume writing, and customer service, things that would help her secure a steady job once she graduated. Her instructors noticed her dedication and often praised her for her hard work. "You're going to go far," one of them told her after class one evening. Jasmine beamed, feeling a spark of pride she hadn't felt in ages. Darius continued to check in regularly, offering guidance whenever she needed it. He helped her draft cover letters, practice interview questions, and even connected her with potential employers in the area. His support went beyond just financial assistance. It was emotional, practical, and unwavering. One afternoon, while picking up Elijah from the community center, Jasmine ran into Darius unexpectedly. He was volunteering there, reading stories to a group of children who sat cross-legged on the floor, completely captivated by his deep, soothing voice. When he spotted her, he waved her over. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked warmly. Jasmine smiled, nodding toward the kids. "Looks like you've got quite the audience." Darius chuckled. "They're tougher critics than any boardroom meeting, let me tell you." Elijah tugged on Jasmine's sleeve, pointing excitedly. "Mommy, Mr. Darius reads really funny voices." Jasmine laughed, ruffling Elijah's hair. "I can see that." Darius knelt down to Elijah's level, handing him a book. "Here, buddy, why don't you pick out a story for next time?" Elijah's face lit up as he flipped through the pages, choosing carefully. Watching the two of them interact, Jasmine felt a warmth she hadn't expected. Darius wasn't just helping her, he was becoming part of their lives in a way that felt natural and genuine. Meanwhile, Elijah's progress was undeniable. The nightmares that used to wake him up screaming became less frequent. He started talking more openly about his feelings, thanks in part to the therapy sessions Darius had arranged. His counselor, a kind woman named Ms. Clara, specialized in working with children who had experienced trauma. She taught Elijah coping strategies, like drawing pictures or squeezing a stress ball when he felt scared. Over time, Elijah began to trust her and himself a little more each day. One evening, as Jasmine tucked Elijah into bed, he surprised her with a question. "Mommy, do you think we'll always have this house?" Jasmine paused, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. "I hope so, baby, and if we don't, we'll find another one just as nice. We're safe now, okay? No one can hurt us anymore." Elijah nodded, snuggling under the covers. "Okay, Mommy. I love you." Jasmine kissed his cheek. "I love you too, more than anything." The months passed and Jasmine completed her training program with flying colors. On graduation day, she stood tall in front of her classmates, accepting her certificate with pride. As she looked out at the small crowd gathered in the room, her eyes landed on Darius, who clapped enthusiastically from the back row. Later, as they celebrated with pizza and soda, Elijah ran up to her, hugging her legs tightly. "You did it, Mommy," he cheered. Jasmine picked him up, spinning him around. "We did it, baby, together." With her newfound skills and confidence, Jasmine landed a part-time job at a local retail store. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave her a sense of purpose. Her co-workers were friendly, and her manager appreciated her work ethic. For the first time in years, she felt like she was contributing, not just to her family, but to the world around her. And every paycheck brought a renewed sense of independence, a reminder that she was capable of providing for herself and Elijah. But Jasmine didn't forget where she came from, or the people who had wronged her. With Darius's encouragement, she decided to take legal action against her late husband's family. It wasn't an easy decision. The thought of facing them in court terrified her, dredging up memories she'd rather leave buried. But Darius reassured her, reminding her that justice wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure. "This isn't just for you," he said during one of their talks. "It's for Elijah too. So he knows no one has the right to treat people the way they treated you." Jasmine met with a pro bono attorney recommended by Darius, laying out her case step by step. The lawyer listened intently, promising to fight for her rights as both a mother and a survivor of domestic abuse. Preparing for trial was exhausting, requiring Jasmine to relive every painful moment, every cruel word, every bruise left behind. But she pushed through, knowing it was worth it. For her son, for herself, and for anyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation. On the day of the trial, Jasmine dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue dress Darius had helped her pick out, and held Elijah's hand tightly as they entered the courthouse. Her heart raced as she took the stand, answering questions from the prosecution and defense. When she recounted the night she and Elijah were thrown out into the rain, her voice trembled, but she didn't break. She spoke clearly, her words filled with quiet strength. By the end of her testimony, even the judge seemed moved. The verdict came days later, guilty on all counts. Her in-laws were sentenced to jail time and stripped of any parental rights they might have claimed over Elijah. As the gavel struck, Jasmine exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was over. Finally. Truly over. Stepping outside the courthouse, she squinted against the sunlight, feeling lighter than she had in years. Elijah skipped ahead of her, laughing as he chased a butterfly. Watching him, Jasmine allowed herself a rare moment of joy. They had survived the storm, and now they were free. That night, as she tucked Elijah into bed, Jasmine whispered a promise to herself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would keep fighting, for her son, for their future, and for the life they deserved. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Jasmine as she stepped into the crisp afternoon air. The weight of the verdict still hung heavy in her chest, but for the first time in years, it felt like a weight she could carry. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for Elijah too. She glanced down at her son, who was skipping ahead of her, his laughter echoing off the courthouse steps. He didn't fully understand what had happened inside that room, but he sensed something important had changed. His eyes sparkled with a lightness she hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. As they walked to the car, Darius stood waiting by the curb, leaning casually against his sleek black sedan. When he saw them, his face broke into a warm smile. "How'd it go?" he asked, opening the passenger door for Jasmine. She slid into the seat, pulling Elijah onto her lap. "It's over," she said simply, her voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. Darius nodded, closing the door gently before walking around to the driver's side. "That's good news," he said, starting the engine. "You've earned this." The ride back to their apartment was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Elijah fell asleep in Jasmine's arms, his head resting against her shoulder. Watching him, Jasmine felt a surge of gratitude. For Darius, for the strength she'd somehow found within herself, and for the life they were slowly rebuilding. When they arrived home, Darius helped carry Elijah inside and tucked him into bed without a word. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the kind of person he was. Someone who noticed the little things and cared enough to act on them. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine threw herself into creating a new normal for her and Elijah. Her part-time job at the retail store became a steady source of income, and she started picking up extra shifts whenever she could. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave her a sense of purpose, and a paycheck that allowed her to buy groceries without worrying if there would be enough left for rent. On weekends, she volunteered at the community center where Elijah spent so much of his time. She wanted to give back, to help other families who might be struggling the way she once had. Elijah thrived in the stability of their new routine. He made friends easily, bonding with other kids over games of tag and shared snacks during lunch breaks. One day he came home clutching a handmade card covered in glitter and stickers. "What's this?" Jasmine asked, smiling as she opened it. Inside, written in wobbly letters, were the words, "Thank you for being my mom." Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged him tightly. "I love you, baby," she whispered. "More than anything." But Jasmine knew she couldn't stop there. The trial had given her closure, but it also ignited a fire inside her, a desire to do more, to make sure no one else had to endure what she and Elijah had gone through. With Darius's encouragement, she began brainstorming ways to turn her pain into purpose. What if she could create a safe space for single mothers and their children, a place where they could find shelter, support, and resources without judgment or shame? Darius loved the idea. "You're exactly the person to make this happen," he told her one evening as they sat together in the living room while Elijah played nearby. "You've lived it. You know what these women need." Jasmine hesitated, biting her lip nervously. "But I don't even know where to start," she admitted. Darius smiled, leaning forward. "Start small. Build it step by step, and I'll help however I can." True to his word, Darius became her biggest cheerleader. He connected her with local nonprofits, introduced her to potential donors, and helped her draft a business plan. Together, they scouted locations for what would eventually become a nonprofit called Second Chances. The name came to Jasmine late one night as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. It summed up everything she wanted the organization to represent: hope, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserves another shot at happiness. Opening Second Chances wasn't easy. There were permits to file, volunteers to recruit, and countless hurdles to overcome. But Jasmine tackled each challenge head-on, fueled by the memory of her own struggles. She poured her heart into every detail, from painting the walls a cheerful yellow to stocking the pantry with food and supplies. When the doors finally opened 6 months later, she stood outside watching as families trickled in, some hesitant, others desperate for help. Each face reminded her of herself 2 years ago, scared, exhausted, but determined to keep going. Word spread quickly about the nonprofit, thanks in part to media coverage highlighting Jasmine's story. Local newspapers wrote articles about her journey, calling her a beacon of hope for struggling families. Social workers referred clients to her, knowing they'd find compassion and understanding behind those bright yellow walls. Soon, Second Chances became a lifeline for dozens of women and children, offering not just shelter but counseling, job training, and legal assistance. Jasmine's own growth mirrored the success of the nonprofit. She transitioned from working part-time at the retail store to managing the day-to-day operations of the organization. It was demanding work, requiring long hours and constant problem-solving, but she loved every minute of it. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a real difference, not just for herself and Elijah, but for an entire community. Elijah, meanwhile, continued to flourish. Now 8 years old, he was thriving in school, earning praise from his teachers for his kindness and curiosity. He often tagged along with Jasmine to the nonprofit, helping hand out snacks or play with younger kids. "He's going to be a counselor someday," Darius joked during one visit, watching Elijah comfort a crying toddler. Jasmine laughed, ruffling her son's hair. "I think you're right." Years passed, and Second Chances grew beyond what Jasmine ever imagined. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing her to expand services and open additional locations. Women who had once sought refuge at the nonprofit returned as volunteers, eager to pay it forward. Jasmine traveled to conferences, sharing her story and advocating for policy changes to protect vulnerable families. Through it all, she remained grounded, never forgetting where she came from, or the people who had helped her get there. One evening, as she stood on stage at a fundraising gala, addressing a crowd of supporters, Jasmine took a moment to reflect. "This journey hasn't been easy," she began, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "There were days when I didn't think I could keep going, days when it felt like the world had turned its back on me. But then someone showed me kindness, a stranger who saw us in our darkest hour and decided to help. That act of compassion changed everything. She paused, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Darius, sitting near the front row. He gave her a subtle nod, his expression soft with pride. "Today, I stand here not because I'm special," she continued, "but because I believe in the power of second chances, because I know what it means to be broken and rebuilt, and because I want every mother and child out there to know this. No matter how hard life gets, you are not alone. We will fight for you. We will lift you up, and we will remind you that you are worthy of love, respect, and a brighter future." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. As Jasmine stepped off the stage, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had come so far, from a young mother beaten and cast out clinging to her son for survival, to a leader inspiring others to rise above their circumstances. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she knew she could handle whatever came her way, as long as she kept fighting for what mattered most. Years passed, and Jasmine's life transformed in ways she never imagined. What started as a small nonprofit operating out of a modest building had grown into a network of support centers across the region. Second Chances became more than just an organization. It was a movement, a symbol of hope for single mothers and their children who felt lost and forgotten by the world. And at the heart of it all was Jasmine, a woman who once stood broken on the streets but now stood tall, inspiring others to believe in themselves. Elijah grew up watching his mother pour her soul into helping others. He saw how she listened intently to every story, hugged strangers like they were family, and worked tirelessly to ensure no one felt alone. It shaped him in profound ways. By the time he reached high school, Elijah wasn't just a bright student, he was also deeply empathetic. His teachers often remarked that he had a gift for understanding people, especially those struggling with pain or fear. "You're going to change lives someday," one of them told him after he spent hours comforting a classmate who'd been bullied. Elijah shrugged modestly, but deep down, he knew it was true. He wanted to follow in his mother's footsteps, not necessarily running a nonprofit, but making a difference in whatever way he could. Darius remained a constant presence in their lives, though his role evolved over time. He stopped being just a benefactor or mentor and became something closer to family. On weekends, he'd visit the nonprofit, rolling up his sleeves to help wherever needed, whether it was fixing a leaky faucet, organizing donated supplies, or simply sitting down with a mom who needed someone to talk to. The bond between him, Jasmine, and Elijah grew stronger with each passing year. They weren't related by blood, but they shared something deeper, a connection forged through kindness, trust, and mutual respect. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues over the city, Jasmine stood outside, the original Second Chances location. She held a microphone in one hand and looked out at the crowd gathered before her. Hundreds of people had come to celebrate the nonprofit's 10th anniversary, an event that felt less like a fundraiser and more like a family reunion. There were women who had once sought refuge there, now thriving in careers and raising happy kids. There were volunteers who had dedicated years of their lives to keeping the mission alive. And there were children running around, laughing and playing, oblivious to the struggles their parents had overcome. Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first walked through these doors, I didn't know if I'd make it through another week. I was scared, tired, and convinced that my best days were behind me. But then something incredible happened. People showed up. Strangers became friends, friends became family, and together, we built this place." She paused, glancing at Darius, who stood near the front of the crowd, clapping softly. Then she turned to Elijah, now a teenager with dreams bigger than the sky. "This isn't just my story," she continued. "It belongs to everyone here tonight. To the moms who fought tooth and nail to give their kids a better life. To the volunteers who gave their time, energy, and love without expecting anything in return. And to the children who remind us every day why we do what we do. For hope, for laughter, for second chances. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the warm night air. As the celebration continued, Jasmine wandered through the crowd, hugging old friends and meeting new faces. One woman approached her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved my life," she said, clutching Jasmine's hands tightly. "I didn't think I'd ever escape the abuse, but you showed me I could. Now I'm finishing nursing school and my daughter has a safe home. Thank you." Jasmine hugged her fiercely, blinking back tears of her own. "You did the hard work," she replied softly. "We just gave you a little push." Later that night, as the festivities wound down, Jasmine found herself sitting on a bench outside the building. Elijah joined her, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "Here, Mom," he said, handing her one. She smiled, taking a sip. "Thanks, baby." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Finally, Elijah spoke. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if Mr. Darius hadn't stopped that day?" Jasmine sighed, leaning back against the bench. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. Thinking about what-ifs takes away from the beauty of right now. Look at us, Eli. Look at what we've built. We're okay. More than okay. We're thriving." Elijah nodded, staring off into the distance. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" he asked quietly. Jasmine wrapped an arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "I know he would be," she said firmly. "He loved us so much, and he'd see how far we've come, how strong we are. Don't ever doubt that." As the years went on, Elijah followed through on his dream of becoming a counselor. After earning a degree in psychology, he returned to work alongside his mother at Second Chances, specializing in trauma therapy for children. Together, they created programs designed to heal not just physical wounds but emotional ones too. Kids who had once been silent and withdrawn blossomed under Elijah's care, learning to express themselves and trust again. Watching him interact with them, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Her boy had grown into a man who carried compassion in his heart, a legacy born from their shared struggles. Darius, meanwhile, continued to support the nonprofit in countless ways. Though he remained humble about his contributions, his impact was undeniable. When asked why he cared so much, he always gave the same answer. "Because when you see someone drowning, you throw them a lifeline. That's all I did. Jasmine and Elijah did the rest." His words reflected the truth. He hadn't fixed their problems for them. Instead, he had given them the tools and encouragement to fix things themselves. On Elijah's graduation day, as he stood on stage accepting his diploma, Jasmine glanced at Darius seated beside her in the audience. Their eyes met and they exchanged a knowing smile. This journey had brought them closer than any of them could have predicted. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were builders, creators, changemakers, and they had done it all together. Looking back, Jasmine realized that life's greatest challenges often lead to its most unexpected blessings. Losing her husband had shattered her world, but it had also taught her resilience. Being cast out by her in-laws had left her homeless, but it had shown her the power of community. Struggling to survive had pushed her to her limits, but it had revealed her strength. And meeting Darius, that had been the turning point, the moment when despair transformed into hope. As she sat there, surrounded by the people she loved, Jasmine whispered a silent thank you to the universe. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, she and Elijah would face it head-on. Because they had already faced the worst and come out stronger on the other side. And so their story continued, not as victims or survivors, but as victors,